Today's podcast is with Chris Lambert. So Chris is known as the technology and leadership whisperer. So I definitely want to dig in and know more about that. Chris is also the CTO at Greenworks ESG and also the founder of Kudosi, which is an app he built to help organizations visualize, communicate, and execute their strategy and goals. So we're going to dig into the best ways to fill the gap between strategy and delivery. And also, more importantly, find out how leaders can engage their teams and get everyone pulling in the same direction. Thanks for joining, Chris.
Well, thank you, John. Appreciate your time and appreciate being here.
Awesome. So, Chris, welcome to the show. And before we get into goal setting and strategic alignment, tell us a bit why you set up Kudosi and, more importantly, some of the challenges you see around businesses and strategic goals.
Sure. My journey with Kudosi really starts probably about 10 years ago when I first started to step in or transition from a frontline software developer consultant role, doing a lot of architecture and whatnot, into more of a leadership role. And I remember my first experience being part of an executive team. I was invited to that very first roundtable meeting with all the execs, and I stepped in that room being with a lot of intrepidation. Right, it was a new experience. It was a bit scary because you're operating at a different level than you have in the past, and it's just there's a lot to take in. And so I went in that room thinking, wow, am I gonna measure up, right? All these people have all this experience being leaders, and here I am, it's day one. Right. And I walked in the room, long story short, after some squabbling, finger pointing, and generally just lack of cohesion. And it just became apparent to me that there was a real problem in the room, and it felt more like a schoolyard than it did a professional kind of setting.
Which is amazing that people operate at that level and act like that.
Yeah, that's right. And and not to diminish the work that many people in the room had done. I think that individually they were all strong. It was more a function of how did we work as a team, and did we have a unifying vision, and how are we keeping one another accountable? And when we did have accountability, often it was a moving goalpost. So how do we identify that the goalpost has moved, if it needs to move, or should it even move at all, and what does it look like? So I think what failed the people in that room was a combination of many things, but first and foremost, it was really just a lack of general cohesion, and a lack of transparency, and a lack of overall collaboration and accountability. So those are kind of the pinnacles of Kudosi today.
Yeah, it's making it real, isn't it? Because I mean, both you and I have seen clearly companies, projects, initiatives where the goal or the outcome is set up front, and sometimes just almost like a checkbox. We've done that. Now let's get into delivery and execution. And yes, it means so people reading something will take different things from that, and probably led to some of the squabbling you saw in that leadership meeting as well. I see this from the vision, and I see this from the vision. So it's getting that alignment.
Well, you're right. And I think it doesn't have to be anything complex. In fact, the simpler, the better. You just need, I like to think of it as, and what I call it as a common watering hole, right? And you need to have that common watering hole where people can come to meet and make decisions, and they should walk away with a very similar perspective on what the end result should be, right? And you're not always going to have everyone thinking the same way, because we all operate on different levels, different places, operations versus sales, stuff like that. But you should all have a common understanding of the core goals of the organization moving forward, and everyone should be rowing in that same direction at the very least. And that's key, and that's something I see time and time again. I don't think I've ever joined a company where I could honestly say, walk out of my first executive meeting and say, wow, everybody's got everything dialed in, and I'm just here to do what I'm paid for. It usually is
right.
you walk in, you have to find out ways to clear barriers and enable your teams in order to do what you're getting paid for in the first place, right? So
Yeah.
that's generally the experience.
And this great comments, because that actually touches on the first point of something I was working on going into this chat with you, because I want to just think back in terms of, okay, what makes a strategy and goal real for teams? And I came up with 5 steps around defining the goals being number 1, then creating the playbook and roadmap, number 2, number 3 is engaging your teams, number 4 is review what's going on and check and adjust it as needed, and number 5 is don't set and forget. It's an ongoing journey. And what you were just articulating there, Chris, was very much around point number 1, defining those goals, but then getting everyone aligned on it and making sure everyone agrees on it at the leadership top level first before you start anything else.
John, your steps, I think those are a pretty good way to summarize it. What I would say is, and maybe just to add to that a little bit, what I found in my experience is that it's often actually quite easy to get people together to do the planning and decide on goals. There's a lot of difficulty in doing that properly. I'm not saying that's an easy endeavor. I'm just saying that usually they'll reach an inflection point. The board will get ticked off at the CEO. So the CEO is like, oh, okay, we better get our ducks in a row, or sales isn't meeting targets, and operations, things are blowing up. So you'll have a meeting of the minds, you'll have some inflection point. And so the exercise of going through and identifying, what your mission is, your values, what your goals are, and then kind of doing that initial triage to figure out the high level. That's an exercise in itself. I'm not saying it's trivial whatsoever, but it's often much easier to actually get people to the table to do that. The hard part, and I found this with Kudosi as well, is after that's done and the maintenance of it. So the monitoring and using, whether you're using Kudosi or your spreadsheets or whatever you're doing, your team status meetings, the difficult part is keeping those relevant, doing the ceremonies in a way that it's happening weekly, and it's happening in meaningful ways that feeds back into the central strategy that you plan. There's often a lot of drift. You start out with a great idea and a great plan. Everybody has their task. Now go, and I'll see you guys next year type thing, right?
Right.
And nobody says that, but that's really what ends up happening, and you drift. So I view the second half as being very difficult, and it doesn't require complex tooling, but it does require some agreement and some commitment for everyone to come to the table. And it's tough because, that's where transparency and accountability really start to come into play, is that second half. Yeah.
And again, you touched on a great point, because I found an interesting statistic, and I want to make sure I capture it correctly, because McKinsey and Co. said that 72% of leaders said they involved employees in developing the organization's purpose and had everyone aligned. But when they asked the frontline employees, only 56% said they actually agreed with that. So there's that natural, like you say, getting the alignment, leadership around strategic goals at the top it's simple. It's hard. It might be hard to do, but it's simple in terms of the process. But then getting that ongoing commitment, how do we make this real? How do we build that out? That's the real, like you said, that second half is really challenging.
Well, I think it goes deeper than that too, John. So you're right. So those stats sound about right. In fact, I would say they're probably generous, to be honest, from what I've seen. Maybe I've just been on the wrong side of the tracks, but
as I was reading that out, I'm thinking, that's actually higher than I'd expect from frontline workers, actually.
But cynicism aside, when you think about that disconnect, one of the biggest problems. So 2 things about that. One of the foundational precepts of Kudosi originally was to create a servant leadership tool. So what I found when I became a leader, I had 20 years or so of working on the front lines, and all I ever wanted myself as a developer, or an architect, was accountability from the top, meaning that they would often make promises and they wouldn't be completed, yet the promises that you made had to be completed. And often what would happen is the lack of accountability at the top would bleed down into everybody else, and it would become a shell game and a CYA or a finger pointing exercise. And unfortunately, the folks lower on the totem pole often had to take the blame. And I found that for me was a dynamic that was critical to get past in order to be a successful company. And the more companies I worked in, because I've worked in many companies, over a couple dozen, and I found that as I worked in these different companies, what I discovered is the companies that took accountability right to the top, and they exposed that and made it transparent, were the ones that were most successful, because not only was it holding the leadership accountable, but it was also doing it in a way that was transparent to the whole organization. And that also helped create clarity on goals moving forward. So yeah, the problem with Cadoci, in selling Cadoci, I've found, is often our target customer is the leadership team. And the problem with that is that when you sell a product and you're basically saying, hey, no more skunk works or black ops or the ability to play the shell game, this is all going to be, everybody's cards are on the table now. It can be a very tough sell unless you find the right culture and organization. So that's one of the challenging parts with Cadoci, is that it does create that bi-directional accountability, both sides, the equation, right? And that's a tough thing. However, the reward for it is, in my observation, I've yet to see a single company fail that creates that bidirectional accountability. I've never seen it. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure someone comes up with a horrible business idea and everything's executed perfectly, but it still fails. That happens, I'm sure, all the time. But from what I've seen in working with companies that at least have some market viability, they're past the initial seed stage, so they've proven out the company's viable. From that stage forward, when you're executing on your plans and you have that bidirectional accountability, it's a game changer. It really does differentiate the winners from the losers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when I'm brought in to do technology project resets or assess the status of a project, that's the first thing I ask for, is that the goals. Are we clear on those goals? What are they? Then we get into the accountability. What's the roles and organizations within that project? So are they delivering to those? Have you got the right people on the bus? To quote the Good to Great book. And it's just making sure, to your point, that accountability is both up and down, tied to the goals. Because when people get stressed and busy and you need to make decisions fast, if you can tie everything back to your goals, it makes decision making so much easier. Because does it impact our goals of a company or project? Yes. Okay, we go that way. If it doesn't, why are we even talking about it?
You're 100% right. And it sounds simple, but so many people miss the mark on it. I've had experience now as a CEO and as a CTO and as a developer. So from each of those kind of lenses, if you will, and probably the most educational role for me was CEO, because it put me in a role where I really started to understand the pressures the CEO has to deal with.
Okay, so yeah, talk more about that as well, because I think a lot of people see CEOs as a certain role as just they've worked their way up and now they're just responsible for everything.
And the reward is you get to play golf all day and go to events. And so it's interesting. I had that perception when I was younger, and I always had a bit of a disdain for leadership, because I found that traditional business models, it's a very closed door affair, and so it fosters that kind of behavior, that kind of feeling, I should say, and the behavior that results from it. Modern businesses, like over the last decade, that's changed. The dynamic has changed a lot. And I think we've improved a great deal as a society, as companies, in handling that, in creating this much more team-focused, open and aware and transparent kind of working space. The thing I found with CEO that was really educational was when I stepped in that role, a lot of people will have their own definitions of CEO, and your viewers
Yes.
will make their own determination on this. But as I was informed by a very successful and knowledgeable man who helped mentor me through the experience, your CEO has to be your number one salesperson.
Yes, I was
It's
going to
that
say they
simple.
represent the company and the organization.
They represent the company. They champion the product. More than that, they have to pick up the slack in all areas, and ultimately they're responsible for the success of the company. And so what you'll see as a company, as staff, is that your CEO will appear to go all over the place sometimes. So they'll be like, wow, we've got to drive like 10% revenue increase this quarter. You know, that's what the board wants and that's what shareholders want. So you'll see them, they'll talk to all these different companies and they'll say, oh, these might be good, good partnerships for us to engage, and they become sales vectors for us, and or channel partners, if you will. Maybe this one big customer, if we could land this big customer, this is a big deal, right?
Acquisitions, divestitures.
How do we do that? Yeah, how do we do the M&A? What about M&A? Can we just buy this company to get that, relieve that pressure for the next year and allow us to focus on being a company that's we're focused on product as opposed to revenue. So there's always that pressure, and what I found and what really helped was I used Cadoci in that role, actually, because we didn't have a tool. We were actually using meetings and Word documents and spreadsheets, and it's a gong show. Sure, you write it down, but you're writing it. You're just putting words in a place to go die. That's basically what happens with these documents, right? You're just laying them to rest. With Cadoci, we made it a policy that, hey, every week we have our Monday morning meeting. We have stand up and we follow the goals and we report on each of those goals and where they're tracking. And what it did for me as a CEO was it made me better appreciate what's going on in the company. So I'm not dropping down all these different initiatives and cratering the velocity of my team. I can see the impact and I have to make choices. I have these 3 things going on. That's what we have capacity for. Either you hire more staff to do number 4, or you choose one of those 3 to slide. Those are hard decisions to make, but a good CEO will make them. And they in order to make them correctly, they need to have the information. And that's why that goal planning is so critical for it. And on the flip side, John, as an employee, it also helps me understand too, when I'm seeing my CEO make decisions where they're taking something out to put something else in, it may disrupt me, and I may feel like, it may frustrate me a bit. But I'll much better be able to empathize with that and accept that and move forward,
and adjust.
Because I don't feel like they're piling on. I understand that something's happened, and I can ask questions about it and be informed and feel like part of the process.
Yeah, and it helps that adjustment because decisions are made sometimes at senior leadership levels, and we're not sure why. But if they're tied to the goals, again, very clearly, here's the goal of the company, here's strategic objectives. We're making this change, and here's why. Here's how it aligns to that goal. And I often see that with technology initiatives that I'm helping with, and also training project managers, which I want to come back to in a second, because when we say, hey, we're going to change the scope or add more budget, spend more time on testing, for example, because one of our goals is a quality product, making sure it's the customer success satisfaction is the highest possible. Therefore, we're going to spend more time and money on testing, evaluation, customer feedback, the agile delivery, to make sure that happens, because one of our goals is the success, the satisfaction of the customers. If on the other hand, if goal is time, we just need to get this out the door quickly, we then may sacrifice some of the testing and product development because we want to get a first version out very, very quickly. But either way, the decision makes very quickly because the goal is very clear.
John, there's it's interesting. So the company I've joined recently is Greenworks ESG, and so Greenworks, as the name implies, works in the ESG space, and it's a new space, and there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of confusion as to what frameworks, what questions, how to structure this, how to set up policies, and all of this. And so it's all
or even why should I do it? I've heard a lot of companies say, why do I even do ESG? It seems to be a trend rather than an actual shareholder expectation.
Absolutely, and it's becoming policy. It's something that we're all going to be responsible for, and it's definitely moving forward. and regardless, I'm not here to say whether or not you should believe in ESG or not. Obviously, you know my thoughts based on where I'm at. But what I will say is this: there's a big challenge for a lot of companies, and they're already spending a lot of money in this space. And I think in much the same way that Cadoci has tackled goals and within a general context and organization, the ESG space has a very similar kind of dynamic that you do in strategic planning for businesses. So, you know, on the Greenworks side, sure, you're dealing with maybe environmental concerns, right, or social governance type policies and whatnot. But here's the thing: in those cases, you also need to have a plan, and you also need to track you need to break that plan down into objectifiable goals, right? They can't be subjective. They have to be objective, measurable goals that you can actually quantify and execute on. And then once you have that, you need a way to properly track how you're doing against
measure.
them. And so whether you're in the oil and gas space, you're in ESG space, you're in any space like the aerospace, that type of company, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, every company needs these steps, and you need them to be successful. And the companies that flail about, sure, you may find a big customer that you happen to land because of your network, because of your connections to within a particular company. Maybe you're a previous employee, and you take the app and you just make a company out of it and sell it back to the company. You know, there's all sorts of stories on how these things start, and that works to get you going. But if, as a company, you want to thrive and you want to grow and you want to be successful, you need to have a plan. You need to know how you're going to achieve that plan, and ideally, you need to track all of that information and understand how you're tracking against the plan. Because how else do you make the determination what kind of resources you need, and if you're a right size as a company, and what kind of skills are missing in the building and stuff like that. So all of these things people tend to do, they keep them in their head and they approach it that way. But in my estimation, and believe me, you're talking to someone who loves to go cowboy. I mean, I hate the administrative side. I hate paperwork. I hate that stuff. But that's exactly why Cadoci exists. Because I was like, you know what? It doesn't have to be this painful. For God's sakes, just put something together that's simple, that I can communicate with everyone. And further to that, John, the other thing about a tool like Cadoci, is just as an example, is obviously I'm a bit biased, but here's the thing: it's not just about the planning and the goals and whatnot. Those are key. Those are the foundation on which you build this success. But there's other components to that, and one of the biggest ones, and this is something I've noticed, maybe you've noticed too. But have you ever seen the larger an organization gets, you'll see that they start to segregate themselves and their planning and goals by their tool selection. So your Salesforce team will go to like Salesforce or HubSpot, and then your development team will go to like Jira or some Atlassian tools, like Target Process, as another example.
And IT will go to SharePoint Online, and it's then there's
your accounting team is in Oracle, NetSuite, and Finance, stuff like that, right? And it just goes on. And what you'll find is each of these tools has more or less overlap in some solution for tracking, like what they view as tasks and KPIs and stuff like that. The problem with those tools is that if you use them if you're a salesperson using HubSpot, it's a perfect tool perhaps for you, right? I'm just saying to people who like HubSpot, choose your flavor, Pipedrive, whatever. I'm not here to sell you any CRM, but the point is, the salespeople are going to be very comfortable in their tool of choice, and the development people are going to be very comfortable in their tool of choice, and onwards with accounting and operation. And that creates siloing, and it doesn't create that unified vision that you need. And so with Cadoci, I found, look, keep it super simple so anybody from any department can drop in there. Don't create the extra trappings and all of that, because all that does is start to gravitate you towards one department or another. This needs to be a DMZ. It needs to be super simple. Here's your goals. Here's where you're at, and here's whose head's on the block for it. Go. Right.
Exactly.
That's the design the idea with Kudosi.
Yeah, and I don't know why people think it's going to be easy, because it's not. And just the more people involved in anything, the more complex something gets. And I always like to go back to the analogy of when a company starts or a couple of people get together, one-to-one, two people, there's just a two-way communication, one person to another person. But as soon as you introduce a third person to that, you've now got one to each of the three and each of the other three, which actually makes 6 communication methods. So you've already gone from 2 to 6. So then 6 ways of communication with just another person. So if you add 4 people, just to illustrate this as an exponential growth, if you add a 4th person, you've now got 24 different ways to communicate, or different connection points. So just imagine that on a scale of several thousand people. It's insane. And people expect it to be easy, and it's not. But this is why we're here today to talk about this.
And so often, what you'll get to make that manageable is you'll get intentional siloing. So a good example in development is you'll often route decisions through like a product owner and a tech lead, right? And all this. So you have 7 developers, one of which is a dev lead. So now you reduce your connection to one to back to the business, right? And those things happen in larger organizations. But the problem with that is that the more you do that, the more you hide information which could impact your success throughout all the layers that aren't being engaged. And so again, a tool like Kudosi or any tool that creates full transparency gives the developer a chance to say, hey, wait a minute, product owner, you're assuming you can take that drop down we built and just create this fancy filter panel, right? Or whatever it's going to be. But we actually can't do that until the next release of the middleware component or whatever. And that's going to set your timeline back a month. So those things are important to understand, especially if you're going to be going in front of a customer. So you don't have those 11th hour, oh my God, we can't do this. Now I have to look, I have mud on my face with the customer and I made all these promises. So those things can be prevented with proper communication through these tools, right? And I think it's very key, and it's something that's very much lacking. And the funny thing for me is, working in SaaS companies, you'll often see SaaS companies try to repurpose a tool like a Jira or an Azure DevOps,
because it's already there. It's right in front of us. Let's use it.
Let's just use it. The only tool I've had remote success with trying to repurpose like that is like a Trello, and that's because Trello is very simple. That's actually Kudosi was, Trello is kind of the inspiration in the sense that let's be the Trello of strategic planning and goal planning, right? So make a tool specific for it, but be super simple. But even that breaks down because it becomes almost like a graphical spreadsheet over time, and things just get buried, So then you get people coming up with their choice on how do I slice the data and view it, and it just becomes a mess. So a very challenging problem, a critical problem for success. But like I said, there are tools out there to help. And I think that, again, the biggest challenge, and I'll reiterate this, is no matter what tool and practice you decide on, without the ceremonies, without the
method, the framework,
the methodology there, and like you say, the framework to actually continually maintain and nurture your strategy. It will always. Have you ever noticed? And I'm sure a lot of folks will have had this experience, but a lot of companies will get to a point where there'll be disconnect at the leadership level, and so they'll go to some kind of leadership getaway. So they'll hire someone to run a facilitator, and they'll run like a 3 to 5 day kind of workshop. And you'll go in there as leadership. You'll find out what your colors are. Am I an aggressive red or a talkative yellow?
What color hat you wear?
Yeah. Try to put me in a bucket, right? So they'll try to basically assess who you are based on some formula. Then based on that, they'll structure and talk about what your values and mission are as a company. And then you'll get down to what are the core things we want to, and it's all like this very much this coach session, if you will. And it works great, fabulous for like the first 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes even the first 1 to 2 months.
Yeah, the honeymoon period when everyone's excited, wants to get going.
Absolutely. And then it just falls apart. And again, that's why, there's this interesting phenomenon with Kudosi I found. And at first I thought it was a flaw in Kudosi. And what I've come to understand is it's actually not a flaw in Cadoci. It's actually a strength. And so I know that sounds like a
okay.
typical
Talk to me
developer.
more
It's
about
not a
that.
bug, it's a feature, right?
Yeah.
But let me explain. In Cadoci, often you'll lay out your goals and you start out with your initial plan. And so you'll typically have 5 to 8 goals if you're disciplined at constraining it. And there'll always be that revenue target goal, that big one, right?
Efficiency, cost reduction. Yeah.
And you'll start out like that. And what'll happen, and what the feedback I had early days with Cadoci was, Chris, we've been using Cadoci for about a month or two now, like it's 1, 2, 3 months in that range. And they'd say, but I don't really feel like it's working very well for us, because all the goals that we put down, like half of them aren't even relevant anymore, right?
Yep.
And and I was at first I thought, well, geez, how do I fix that? And then I realized that I don't fix that. That's actually a good thing. And what I mean by that is, what they were doing before was they had it all in spreadsheets, so it was easy to, it wasn't as visible. They didn't have to see the things that were falling by the wayside. They just focused on the top few things, and that's what they focused on. And then everything below just kind of got lost in the shuffle. With Cadoci, it's right there in front of you. So you're staring at a card that says your objective was to increase your revenue, your ARR by 10% by August 1st. And you are 2 months away now, and you're 12% there, right? And so what happens is that they'll decide, you know what, that's not a realistic goal anymore. We actually want to go down to 2%, and we want to grow our user base instead. So now we have 2 goals that it morphs. But the thing about a tool like Cadoci is it helps you track that. You just take that goal, you archive that, and you create the 2 new goals, and you can track that. But at least you have some forensics. So at the end of the quarter, you can go back and review together and say, yeah, what wasn't finished and why did our goals change so much? But if you don't have that, then you're just flailing about choosing whatever comes to mind, and then you pat yourself on the back saying, wow, I achieved 2%. Wasn't that successful? And your board's sitting there thinking, wait a minute, you said 10%, didn't you? And then now you've got I know, because I was the CEO in this position, now you're in front of the board and you're silver tonguing your way to kind of mix the facts and
backtrack and
narrative. Why things were just, that's how it was. That's how it always was. Like, we always knew that. We just had to articulate it better to you, right?
Yeah, and it's human nature as well, because some folks like to latch on to the goal and say that's what I'm accountable, and the days of these 5-10 year or longer strategic goals are gone now. It changes much faster. So one of the first things to do when I'm going into a medium business or in a project is, okay, what is this shorter term goal? It could be 1 to 3 years max, really. And then to your point, even in that period, and this goes back to that 5-step framework, so that step 4 is review what's working well and adjust what's not. Because as you're going through working, actually making these goals real, starting to deliver on them, not only will you understand more about the goal in terms of its execution, but then other factors are going to come in. Like we said earlier, an M&A, merger and acquisition, something's going to change in the environment, the company. There's a crash in the market. There's suddenly a big growth in the market. So these goals need to adjust along the way.
Well, I want to apologize to the listeners at this point, because I'm making the process of goal planning and accountability and the transparency aspects sound punitive. And so they actually, they are anything but punitive. It's actually the exact opposite. And so, just as an example, when you have that bidirectional, that's why bidirectional is so important. That's why it's so important that people in the front line see everything as much as the people, at the top level, right? Because here's the thing. I had an experience, as a CEO where we had basically an initiative dropped onto us from the board. And normally you would, at the end of the quarter, have this narrative, and you blend that, oh, this happened and that impacted me, and that's why, that changed, what we were able to deliver and stuff. But the nice thing is, because we use Cadoci, we were able to actually quantify what the impact really was, and we were able to show exactly what the impact was. And so I had that dialogue up front, and I was able to identify exactly what
knock onto the other goals. Yeah, love it,
to capture that. And all of a sudden, it created an experience where when we did get to the quarterly, I had that narrative prepared anyhow. That's just the way CEO needs to act, right? But I didn't need it. It was more of a, I'll stop you there. We already know. We already had that discussion. Okay, great. So we move on. So it's and the other thing I find is that keeping things out in the open and creating a culture that's focused around results and supporting people in achieving those results also creates a culture that's really empathetic.
Yep.
And what it means is that yes, you're going to be more accountable and things are more transparent. And if you goof up or whatever, it's going to be out there in the open. But if you operate out in the open all the time, then people get accustomed to this. So the failure becomes less and less of a problem and more of an opportunity and learning experience, right? And it creates these situations where I've been in large organizations where, and I won't name them, but you can think of big oil and gas companies in Calgary, for example, where you make a mistake and you're afraid to report that mistake.
Exactly. Yep. Yes.
So you just try to bury it, right? And then you hope by the time it gets uncovered, there's some other bigger
Something's
fire.
Moved on.
Yeah, we've moved on. And it creates so much cost inefficiency, so much toxic, culture and within a company. It's poison to success. So those are some of my counterpoints. This is not meant to be a punitive tool. It's meant to be a tool to collaborate and support people being successful.
And that's the thing, because when we talk about accountability, a lot of people think, oh my God, I'm going to be held accountable and then I'm going to be punished if I don't get it or don't achieve it. And that's, again, it's not about just that one factor of accountability. It's making sure we're setting goals that drive the company project forward, achieve the outcomes we want for the team. And that's why I always like to add in the drive, like you said earlier, what gives when things change. Aligned to the goals. So if our goals are around cost, time, efficiency, and then we have some other more metrics behind that as well, if suddenly we do have a cost crunch where our budget is halved or increased, it doesn't happen as much, but when it's reduced, what's the impact on the quality, scope, the people? So we have that traditional project trifecta of the time, cost, quality or scope, but then what does that mean for the team in terms of team well-being? What does this mean for the end customer? What does this mean for our leadership team in terms of, do we need to have different messaging come down? What's that adjustment factor? So to your point, wrapping it back, if everyone's accountable in a positive way, everyone's pulling in the same direction and helping each other be accountable, which ultimately achieves the goal of the project, initiative, or company.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's hilarious because I find there's so many dollars spent on things like company events and culture building exercises, things of this nature, all of which I think are very positive and good for our company. So my next statement is not to debate that whatsoever. What I will say, however, is the thing that tends to be missed, the biggest opportunity for creating a positive culture, an empathetic servant leadership type environment where people support one another, whether they're in a leadership role or not, and to really get people engaged and really get buy-in, simply comes down to the idea of, do I feel like I have a horse in this race, if you will, right? And the way to do that is to create that awareness and that transparency and that accountability. And once you have that, I mean, let's be honest, if you're the type of person who wants to get a job and just fluff off and not work at all, well, look, I'm sorry, Cadosi might not be your friend when it comes to tools, right? Nor would any tool for that matter, whether it's Jira or Trello or whatever. It doesn't matter what you choose at that point. None of them are going to be particularly great. But the reality is that if that's the situation, you need to, for your own health and your own well-being and your own career and movement forward in life, you need to find another place to be anyhow.
Yes,
so
exactly. It's not the right fit.
It's not, when we talk about accountability and we talk about these tools to be productive, that's an edge case, and that's a disengagement. Now, the only way to get a person like that engaged is to give them the opportunity to say, hey, we're all in the spotlight together. So instead of putting together a PIP, right? A process improvement plan and all this.
Yeah.
That stuff's nonsense. By the time you get that written up, that person's already out the building.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I've never seen that.
Yeah.
Never seen that have a positive influence. I've only seen people either work around it so they can stay, or find a way, or just move on, right?
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, why not just re-engage them within the culture and support them? And if they're genuine, if there's genuinely some challenges that they're working through, then help them get back on that level, and you can at least help them see where they're impacting the larger picture and being part of that.
And that's
solution.
the thing, because the goals are bringing out the honesty, because they're actually helping that person know they're in the right role and how to help deliver, contribute to that initiative and project and company. Or they're actually in the wrong role, because these goals are giving that clarity to say, actually, maybe you should be considering something different. And I've had that. And I know when I'm brought in to rescue projects or advise project managers on technology delivery, that's why I always go back to one of the first things is that accountability. Start with the goals, then the accountability of your team, the role, organization. Are the right people in the right roles? Because if they're not, let's change it. It's not going to your point earlier around a performance improvement plan is not going to fix the problem. We need to take action quickly, and you're doing them a favor, quite frankly.
Well, and there's another phenomenon that I've noticed, which is people will, in the right culture, in the right organization, and that's, in my opinion, I'm a bit optimistic this way, but I'd say 85+% of companies fall in that bucket. And I think in the right organization with the right people, what will happen is, when you see someone struggling, people will naturally reach out to help. And I've seen this.
Yeah, people want to
when
help.
You have transparency in your goals, right? Like, I've had this myself, where I was working on a project on our infrastructure side, and I was having a challenge with the licensing and how we were dealing with our database dynamic. And it's just not to be punished, not to use a pun, but sorry, but to say it was a real cluster. Okay.
Right.
And so I was having some challenges there, and I know one of my lead architect at the time said, hey, you know what, I actually have some experience with this myself. About 4 years ago, I dealt with a similar problem, and here's what happened. And it was interesting, because at the time I was engaging the database side of things, and here was someone coming out from the other side, from the development side, and able to help guide me in that. And that type of scenario can happen for anybody at any level. It's
right.
called
Yes.
leading up, right? Often, and that type of thing happens a lot. And if you have a tool with that transparency, and those goals are quantifiable and understood by everybody, then you open up the opportunity for better collaboration and support from all angles of the organization.
Yeah, awesome. And that's why I always like that transparency, not only around the tool, the goals that such as Cadosi brings, but also the method or implementation framework for deploying or using the tool, which is why it comes back to that 5-step framework we talked about at the beginning. And I will share that in the show notes for our listeners to work through as well.
Yes.
But one thing I do want to circle back on is where we started actually on this, in terms of you self-described as the technology and leadership whisperer. So I'd just like to pick up on that and just understand a bit more about that, and how perhaps other people could be that, and what we should take away from that.
Well, John, so when I sold Payload, and I was moving to my next opportunity, for a bit there, I took about a month just to take a break, and to really do an assessment of where I was at in life, in my career, and where I wanted to go next. And what I realized was, I tried using some of these titles, seem very presumptuous to me, and I saw some people putting in their title, I'm an expert, company builder, or these things where they try to insinuate that hiring them equates to your success or failure. So I found that a little presumptuous.
Yeah, hopefully not insinuates failure. I hope no one's hiring anyone based on the failure side of things.
Well, I mean, and actually, if you think about it logically, a person who's failed a lot is actually a valuable individual to have
Exactly.
on
I was
your
going to
team
say,
because they've
yeah.
learned a lot.
Learn. Yes.
And if you don't want to repeat those mistakes, maybe you should consider them. But so I was looking at these titles, you know, and you know, ex-CEO or whatever, you know, and I just realized these titles describe something, a role you've played, and just trying to hold on to them seems presumptuous to me,
Yeah,
because
agreed.
at the end of the day, what am I really? Well, I'm really just someone who wants to help an organization be successful, and the war chest I bring with me happens to be technology and leadership. And so yeah, I just thought about it. I thought, you know, I saw a couple people on LinkedIn had the Whisper kind of title, and I thought, you know what, maybe that's a good way to put it. Just instead of, you know, I do want to imply that it's my specialization. It's something that I feel I'm good at and I've had good success at in my career. But I don't want it to sound really ostentatious, right? So I don't want to I don't want it to be abrasive. I want to show people that you know, I can have some humility as well as a leader, because I understand I'm still learning as well. So I thought, yeah, what's the intersection of what I bring to a company, and what it comes down to is the technology and the leadership side.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
those are the two things that I think I can bring to any company and help them be successful. And so the Whisper is more of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, hey, that's what I'm good at, and that's what I bring to a company, and that's what I can help with for a company to be successful.
Love it. I love the way you put it in terms of you bringing a war chest of technology and leadership to share the lessons learned and help others do better. So yeah,
it's very, you know, it's very true. I had, so one of my partners in Cadoci, Aaron, you know, we had a discussion the other day, and one of the things that we've done at Cadoci in the past is we've done some contract development to help bring in funds, because it's just a bootstrapped company, right? It's not, there's no huge $10 million round of investments or anything like that, right? It's just us. And it's a passion project. It's something we've really enjoyed and we really believe in. That's why it exists. And you know, one of the interesting things is, as a developer, I was talking with them about this, as a developer, you start to build a war chest yourself. So you know, you write a login page once, twice, three times, and then you start to use different middleware, and before long you have almost a template that you use, and you kind of store that. And the next time a customer comes that needs you to write a login page, or you know, do reporting or whatever, you have something to start from, right? It doesn't mean that you're reusing someone else's code. It just means that you're learning these
leveraging the knowledge and experience,
and leveraging that knowledge
to make it faster for the client.
Absolutely. And that's, I think that's analogous to you know, something that I bring, which is, you know, I've been through this enough. I understand, for instance, you know, how do we do goal planning, and how do we structure our teams? Who do you hire to get going? Things like, you know, do we use Scrum and an agile process? Do you use Kanban, you know, or waterfall? I don't subscribe to the zealotry of there's only one way, right?
No,
I actually
and sometimes a hybrid to make it best of both worlds.
Absolutely. So, you know, Scrum but away, because I do think that in some cases, you know, not using Scrum exactly as is prescribed is a good thing. And actually, if you look at some of the leaders in that community, like the Kent Becks and such, they'll actually say the same thing. So to me, it really comes down to, you need to know the company's culture. You need to know the technology stack and its operating principles and how it's going to function. You need to understand, you know, how you're going to sell and how you're going to package and productize. And once you understand these things, then you can better determine what particular, in my case, template you might start from in order to help a company be successful.
And tailoring that solution as well. And I hear you, we started on similar paths actually, where we have our own companies around. We've seen the traditional templated way to do it, but it's how do we tailor it? How do we make it real for companies to actually get real results, as opposed to just following a standard way of doing things? And I, like you, the agile versus waterfall, and I said, whatever makes sense. It's going to be a bit of everything. We're going to follow a
Absolutely.
framework, a methodology. So we have a process to make sure we're controlling and understanding the delivery life cycle. But how we do it, to the point earlier around, you need to adapt our goals and adjust along the way, depending on events. Exactly the same with any project, initiative, or company. It's adjusting along the
John,
way.
like, knowing nothing else about a company, if I'm brought in and the company is, flailing about and you need to help, sure, sometimes it helps to say, okay, just take the process as is prescribed, and that's usually the best approach to start. Yeah, absolutely. There's So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should just bastardize every single process you find and try to willy-nilly cook something up for a company. It's much more methodical than that. It's that you need to understand each of the core kind of practices and approaches and how you approach them, understand why their ceremonies exist and how they help, and then once you have that understanding and you've had that experience in each of these areas, then you can go into a company and say, okay, company X, right now we feel like there's no visibility. We don't know what development's doing. We have no idea, product has no idea what's going on or what, and sales doesn't know what we're going to be selling. Okay, great. Let's get a sprint planning session and do a sprint review at the end. That review is going to actually present to the whole company to inform our salespeople, our operations people, what's happening, what's going into production. Let's solve that, and let's just follow a very standard, maybe if it's going to be Scrum, fine, type of approach. That would be a fair assessment, and those things can be applied. But once you've gone through a couple sprints, then that's where the
adjust, get the feedback from the team, understand what's going on, and more importantly, setting expectations, being very clear to the team. Here's the tool we're using, in this case, maybe Kudosi, but here's the method we're going to do to implement it, to make it real. Here are the steps we're going to go through. And then that creates predictability and sets expectations with the team, so they know what's happening next. They have less surprises, less uncertainty, and they ultimately pull in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely, John. So, I mean, there are books on this, and it's not a trivial subject by any means. People make a lot of money doing this type of thing, and they should, because the amount of time and effort and unnecessary mistakes and waste that you can remove from an organization by doing it right, I think is substantial. So there's a lot of value to going down this exercise and learning to do it right and whatnot. I would always advise a company to find, someone like yourself or someone who's in the field of helping companies. It's like, you either pay me now or you pay later. So, as a startup in a garage, you probably can't afford to have that guidance. Maybe you're lucky enough that you do, but a lot of folks don't. So yeah, you have no choice. You make it work. You read a couple web pages on what the process should be and stuff like that, and you just go. But as time goes by, and hopefully you're being more successful and things are scaling up, things get, as you said, exponentially crazier. And I want to actually circle back on that for a second, John. When you described that effect of adding a person, so back in university, we had the data communications course, and it talked about different network topologies.
Yeah.
And so I've described the same kind of phenomenon myself, remembering my course, which was, you'd have different network topologies, and one of them was a star topology, and every node connects to the other. And they would show how that grows exponentially as you add nodes. So you could have the hub, hub and spoke. You could have a star. You could have just one central node that goes out to each, right? And so different topologies could easily be used to describe different types of situations in a company, with the effect of how communication gets more and more complex. Right. This is really what I'm trying to get at. And if you think about that and you visualize it that way, I think it becomes much more apparent for people. And so the question is, how can you gain all the benefit of having that mesh-like network topology, but have all the efficiency of a star type topology, or hub and spoke type topology? How can you create that very efficient form of communication while retaining and not losing all the opportunities and information? And so that to me is where your strategy comes into play, because your strategy is really the ability for you to, in essence, kind of display for the whole company where we're going, and preferably why we're doing it and what the impacts are. And once everybody understands that, they can all feel some ownership in it, because I get to see as a developer perhaps that by delaying the login page, I impacted sales, which it basically pushes us back in terms of our profitability, and that may have an overall impact on the survivability of the company, right? Or our next round of investment. So having those understandings and seeing that upfront, honestly, for everyone, is much different than being pulled aside because I'm running late on a project piece and being lectured about how this is so important and why you're creating a problem, because that feels artificial to me.
Exactly. Context is everything. Again, back to that framework methodology of just understanding why it's important and aligning back to that goals just pulls the team along and gets buy-in, which is so a lot of leaders need and want, both at all levels, not just the CEO level, all the way down, the project leadership, all down to managers and leader and senior manager level as well. So Chris, this has been awesome. I know our listeners are going to get a huge amount of value from this, and I'll share the 5-step framework in the show notes as well. But in the meantime, if our listeners want to know more about Kudosi, how can they get hold of you?
Either Kudosi or Greenworks. Happy to talk to folks. For Kudosi, just reach out at Chris, CHRIS, at kudosi.com.
Okay, awesome. And it can also find you on the web as well. You have a website for Kudosi.
That's right. Yeah, www.kudosi.com. And you can also, feel free to reach out via email. If you see me on LinkedIn, feel free to send out a connection. Happy to connect that way too. So
awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, Chris, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, John. Take care.
Will do. Thanks. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk About It podcast, brought to you by WeDeliverYourVision.com, the go-to place for delivering your vision and getting traction fast.